The first shot rang out at sunset, and Ruby Montgomery knew it was going to be another long night at the Silver Dollar Saloon. Not that she had anywhere else to be in the dusty little town of Redemption Springs, Arizona Territory, 1879. Ruby wiped down the bar counter, paying no mind to the usual rowdiness. 3 years working in this establishment had taught her how to differentiate between typical drunken revelry and actual danger. Tonight felt different, though. There was a tension in the air she couldn't quite place. The saloon doors swung open and the noise dimmed momentarily. Ruby glanced up to see a tall stranger framed against the dying light. His face was shadowed beneath a wide-brimmed hat, but she could see the dust of the trail on his clothes. A gun belt hung low on his hips, the holster worn with use. Not unusual in these parts, but something about his steady, measured walk made heads turn. He approached the bar with the careful gait of a man who'd known pain. His eyes, when they met hers, were the color of a summer storm, gray with flecks of blue. "Whiskey," he said simply, his voice deep and rough like it hadn't been used much lately. Ruby reached for a bottle and a glass. "Passing through?" she asked, pouring a generous measure. He placed a coin on the counter. "Maybe, depends on what I find here." "And what might that be?" She pushed the glass toward him. He took a sip before answering. "A second chance." The stranger was about to say something else when the doors burst open again. Sheriff Dale Wilson stood there, his face ruddy with anger, his hand hovering near his gun. "Mitchell Reed," he growled. "Thought I told you never to show your face in this town again." The stranger Mitchell didn't turn around. He just took another slow sip of his whiskey. "Evening, Sheriff. Been a while." Ruby's heartbeat quickened. Mitchell Reed. She'd heard stories about him, a gunslinger with a reputation that stretched across 3 territories. Some called him a killer, others a hero. All she knew was that trouble seemed to follow wherever he went. "I'm giving you till dawn to ride out," the sheriff warned. Mitchell finally turned, his expression unreadable. "I've got business here, won't take long. Your kind of business isn't welcome in Redemption Springs," Wilson spat. "Not after what happened to the Davidson family." A muscle twitched in Mitchell's jaw, but his voice remained level. "That was 5 years ago, Sheriff, and you never did get the whole story." Wilson's hand crept closer to his revolver. "Don't much care for your version. Now finish your drink and get." The saloon had gone quiet, patrons watching the confrontation with wary interest. Ruby felt herself holding her breath. Mitchell's eyes briefly met hers, and something in them, a flash of weariness perhaps, or resignation, made her speak up. "Sheriff, it's still early. Let the man have his drink in peace." Wilson glared at her. "Stay out of this, Ruby." Mitchell drained his glass and set it down carefully. "The lady's right, Sheriff. I'm just having a drink. No need for trouble." He turned back to Ruby. "Much obliged, miss." The sheriff hesitated, then backed toward the door. "Dawn, Reed." Not a minute later, he stepped out into the night. The saloon's chatter slowly resumed. Mitchell ordered another whiskey, and Ruby poured it without comment. She had questions, dozens of them, but knew better than to ask. Men with eyes like his carried stories they rarely wanted to tell. "You didn't have to do that," he said finally. Ruby shrugged. "Everyone deserves a drink before facing whatever's coming." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "And what do you know about what's coming?" "Nothing," she admitted. "But men don't usually come to Redemption Springs unless they're running from something or looking for it." "And which do you think I am?" She studied him for a moment. The scars on his knuckles, the weathered lines around his eyes that suggested he was older than his perhaps 30 years, the way he positioned himself to see both the door and the windows. "Both," she decided. He laughed, a sound that seemed to surprise even him. "Smart lady." Ruby moved to serve another customer, aware of Mitchell's eyes following her. When she returned, he was staring into his glass as if it held answers to questions he hadn't asked. "You got a place to stay tonight?" She found herself asking. He looked up. "Thought I'd camp outside town. Given the welcome I received, I doubt the hotel has a room for me." "There's a stable behind the saloon. Old Jake won't mind if you bed down there." Mitchell studied her face. Why help a stranger the sheriff clearly has issues with? Ruby wiped her hands on her apron. Because I've lived in Redemption Springs long enough to know the sheriff doesn't always get it right, and because everyone deserves a chance to tell their side of a story. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of customers and drinks. Ruby kept an eye on Mitchell, who sat in a corner nursing his whiskey, turning down offers to join poker games. When the saloon finally emptied around midnight, he was still there. Ruby began closing up, wiping down tables and collecting glasses. Mitchell stood and put on his hat. "I appreciate the advice about the stable," he said, "and the friendly face. Been a while since I encountered one of those. What really happened with the Davidson family?" She asked suddenly, the question slipping out before she could stop it. His expression darkened. "It's not a pretty story. Few are out here," Mitchell sighed. "I was hired to protect their ranch from cattle rustlers. Did my job too well, I suppose. Caught the gang red-handed, but it turned out the ringleader was the sheriff's brother-in-law." His voice was flat, emotionless. "There was a shootout. I was the only one left standing, but the Davidsons' youngest boy got caught in the crossfire. Sheriff blamed me. Town believed him." "And you've come back because the truth matters," he said simply. Even 5 years later, Ruby nodded slowly. "Be careful, Mr. Reed. People around here have long memories and short tempers." "Always am, Miss Montgomery." Ruby Montgomery. "Well, Miss Montgomery, I appreciate the warning." He tipped his hat and headed for the door. "Mr. Reed," she called after him. When he turned, she added, "The truth does matter, but so does knowing when to let the past stay buried." "Some things refuse to stay buried, Miss Montgomery. No matter how deep you put them." With that, he disappeared into the night. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of pristine day that made it hard to believe in the darkness of the previous night's conversation. Ruby rose early, as she always did, to help her elderly neighbor Mrs. Holbrook with her chickens before heading to the saloon to clean up from the previous night. She was sweeping the porch when she saw Mitchell Reed walking down the main street, his gait purposeful. He didn't stop at the saloon, but continued toward the far end of town where the cemetery lay. Ruby found herself wondering what ghosts he was visiting. The morning passed quietly. Ruby cleaned the saloon thoroughly, restocked the bar, and took inventory for the weekly supply order. Just before noon, the doors opened, and Mitchell returned, looking more settled than he had the previous night. "Miss Montgomery," he greeted her. "Might I trouble you for some coffee if you have it?" Ruby nodded and moved behind the bar. "Find what you were looking for at the cemetery." If he was surprised that she knew where he'd been, he didn't show it. "Just paying my respects." She set a cup of strong coffee before him. "To the Davidson boy," among others. He wrapped his hands around the cup. "This is a town with secrets, Miss Montgomery." "All towns have secrets," she countered. "What makes Redemption Springs special?" Mitchell took a sip of coffee. "It's where it all started for me, before the gunfights, before the reputation. I grew up 15 miles from here on a small cattle ranch." Ruby leaned against the bar, intrigued. "So this is a homecoming, of sorts." His eyes met hers. "Though I'm not sure you can come home to a place that doesn't want you." Before Ruby could respond, the saloon doors swung open again. This time, it was Thomas Blackwell, the town's banker and one of the most powerful men in Redemption Springs. "Well, well," Blackwell said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Mitchell Reed, I heard rumors you'd slunk back into town." Mitchell didn't turn around. "Blackwell," he acknowledged flatly. The banker approached, stopping a few feet away. He was an imposing figure, tall, broad-shouldered, with a prosperous belly and clothes too fine for a dusty frontier town. "Sheriff Wilson may have given you till dawn, but I'm not so generous. I want you gone. Now." "Not until I've finished what I came for," Mitchell replied calmly. Blackwell's face reddened. "You have no idea what you're meddling with, Reed. The past is past. Leave it be." "The past has a way of catching up, doesn't it?" Mitchell finally turned to face the banker. "Especially when it's built on lies." Ruby sensed the tension building and stepped forward. "Gentlemen, it's too early for this kind of conversation. Mr. Blackwell, can I get you a drink?" Blackwell ignored her, his eyes fixed on Mitchell. "You're playing a dangerous game, Reed. Isn't that what you're paying Wilson to tell me?" Mitchell took another sip of coffee. "I wonder what else you pay him to do or to ignore." The banker's hand twitched toward his coat and Ruby tensed, but he stopped himself. "You're a dead man walking, Reed. Remember that." He turned and stormed out. Ruby exhaled slowly. "You certainly have a talent for making friends." Mitchell's mouth quirked into a half smile. "It's a gift." Then his expression sobered. "You should be careful associating with me, Miss Montgomery. As you can see, I'm not the most popular man in town." "I'm a saloon girl, Mr. Reed. Popularity isn't something I concern myself with." She hesitated. "But I am curious about what brings you back after all this time." He studied her for a long moment, as if deciding how much to trust her. "Let's just say I received some information that suggests what happened 5 years ago wasn't as straightforward as everyone believes. I'm here to set things right. At what cost? Your life, if necessary." He said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, that Ruby felt a chill run through her. "That's a steep price for the truth, Mr. Reed. Some truths are worth it." He finished his coffee and placed a coin on the counter. "Thank you for the coffee, Miss Montgomery, and the conversation." As he walked out, Ruby felt a strange mixture of concern and curiosity. Mitchell Reed was either a fool or a man of principle, perhaps both. Either way, his presence in Redemption Springs had stirred something awake, something that had been dormant for too long. Throughout the day, Ruby heard whispers about Mitchell Reed. Some said he'd killed 20 men in a gunfight in Tucson. Others claimed he worked for the Pinkerton Agency tracking down criminals. A few mentioned that he'd once saved a stagecoach full of passengers from bandits, refusing any reward. It was hard to separate fact from fiction, but one thing was clear: Mitchell Reed was not a man people could agree on. The saloon grew busy as evening approached. Ruby served drinks, deflected unwanted advances, and kept an eye on the door, half expecting Mitchell to return. When he finally did, just after sundown, he wasn't alone. Sheriff Wilson and 2 deputies flanked him, their hands on their weapons. "This is a mistake, Sheriff," Mitchell was saying as they entered. "The only mistake was letting you stay past dawn," Wilson replied. He pushed Mitchell toward a table. "Sit. We're going to have a little talk about why you're really here." The saloon quieted as patrons watched the confrontation unfold. Ruby moved closer, pretending to clean nearby tables. "I told you, I'm just passing through," Mitchell said evenly. "Passing through, but stopping at the cemetery, asking questions about the Davidson case, threatening Blackwell." The sheriff leaned in. "You're stirring up trouble, Reed." "I don't recall threatening anyone. And last I checked, visiting a cemetery wasn't against the law." Wilson's face darkened. "Don't play games with me. You came back for a reason, and I want to know what it is." Mitchell's eyes flicked briefly to Ruby before returning to the sheriff. "Just tying up loose ends before moving on." "Loose ends," Wilson repeated skeptically. "Like what? Personal matters." The sheriff slammed his hand on the table. "You have until first light tomorrow. After that, I'll arrest you for trespassing. And trust me, Reed, the jail in Redemption Springs isn't a place you want to see the inside of." Mitchell didn't flinch. "Understood, Sheriff." Wilson straightened up and adjusted his hat. "Good, now behave yourself." He and his deputies left, casting suspicious glances over their shoulders. Ruby approached Mitchell's table once they were gone. "You seem to have a talent for making the law nervous." He gave her a tired smile. "Another gift." She sat down across from him, surprising herself. "Mr. Reed, I don't know what you're involved in, but it's clear you're in danger. Maybe you should heed the sheriff's warning and leave." "I can't," he said simply. "Not yet. Is revenge worth your life?" His eyes sharpened. "Who said anything about revenge?" Ruby held his gaze. "A man doesn't ride back into a town where he's unwelcome 5 years after a tragedy unless he's seeking justice or revenge. Sometimes they're the same thing." Mitchell leaned back in his chair. "You're perceptive, Miss Montgomery." "Ruby," she corrected him. "If we're going to have conversations like this, you might as well use my given name." Mitchell then. He looked around the saloon, then back at her. "And you're right, Ruby, I am seeking justice, but not the kind you're thinking of." "What kind, then?" He hesitated, then lowered his voice. "The kind that clears an innocent man's name. Yours and others." He ran a hand over his face. 5 years ago, I was hired to protect the Davidson ranch. What I didn't know was that I was walking into the middle of something much bigger, a land grab orchestrated by some of the most powerful men in town. Ruby frowned. "Blackwell," Mitchell nodded. "Among others. They wanted the Davidson land because they knew the railroad was coming through. They tried to force them out, but Jacob Davidson wouldn't sell. So they hired rustlers to steal his cattle, sabotaged his water supply, even burned part of his barn." "And you were hired to stop them," Ruby guessed. "Yes, I managed to catch the rustlers red-handed. There was a shootout. I killed 3 men, but a stray bullet." His voice faltered. "A stray bullet hit young Thomas Davidson. He was only 12. Ruby's heart clenched. "That's terrible," it was. And within hours, Sheriff Wilson had twisted the story completely. According to him, I was working with the rustlers, and when the Davidsons caught us, I opened fire indiscriminately. His eyes hardened. The story stuck because one of the men I killed was Wilson's brother-in-law, who was working for Blackwell. "So you were run out of town, blamed for a child's death you didn't cause," Ruby summarized. "Yes, but that's not why I've come back." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded piece of paper. 3 weeks ago, I received this letter from Jacob Davidson." Ruby took it and read, "I know the truth now. My boy's death wasn't your doing. I have proof of who was really behind it, all documents that show everything. Blackwell, Wilson, all of them. Meet me at my ranch. It's time the truth came out." But the Davidsons moved away after the tragedy," Ruby said, confused. "Jacob came back 6 months ago, bought a small place on the outskirts of town, kept to himself mostly. I rode to meet him as soon as I got this." Mitchell's expression darkened. "I was too late. Found him dead in his cabin, made to look like a heart attack, but I know murder when I see it." Ruby handed the letter back, a cold feeling settling in her stomach. "And you think the sheriff and Blackwell are responsible?" "I know they are." His voice was firm. "But Jacob hid the documents somewhere before they got to him. In his letter, he mentioned where it all began. I think he meant the original Davidson ranch, which is now owned by the railroad," Ruby said, understanding dawning. "That's why you were at the cemetery. You were looking for clues." Mitchell nodded. "Jacob's wife and other children are buried there. I thought maybe he'd left something, but I found nothing." Ruby sat back, processing everything. "This is dangerous ground you're treading, Mitchell. These men have power here." "I know." His eyes met hers, intense and determined. "But I owe it to Jacob and to Thomas. That boy's death has haunted me for 5 years. If I can bring the truth to light." "Then what? Do you think it will change anything? The railroad already has the land. Thomas is still dead." "It will clear my name," he said quietly. "And maybe bring some peace to what's left of the Davidson family. Jacob has a daughter, Rebecca. She deserves to know what really happened to her father." Ruby nodded slowly. "I understand, but you need to be careful. If what you're saying is true, these men won't hesitate to kill again." "I'm counting on it," Mitchell said, a dangerous glint in his eye. "In fact, I'm hoping to force their hand." "That's a risky strategy. It's the only one I've got." He stood up. "I should go. I've involved you too much already." Ruby caught his arm as he turned to leave. "Mitchell, wait. I might be able to help you." He looked surprised. "Why would you want to?" "Because I've lived in this town for 3 years and I've seen how Blackwell and his friends operate. If what you're saying is true, they need to be stopped." She took a deep breath. "And because I know where Jacob Davidson might have hidden those documents." Mitchell's eyes widened. "Where?" "Not here," Ruby said, glancing around the now crowded saloon. "Meet me behind the church at midnight. I'll explain everything then." He studied her face for a moment, then nodded. "Midnight," he agreed, and walked out of the saloon. As the night wore on, Ruby found her thoughts returning to Mitchell Reed. There was something about him that drew her in his determination, his code of honor, or perhaps simply the sadness in his eyes. Whatever it was, she knew she was taking a risk by helping him. But something told her it was a risk worth taking. When midnight approached, Ruby slipped out of the saloon's back door. The night was cool and clear, the stars brilliant overhead. She made her way carefully through the darkened town, staying in the shadows to avoid being seen. As she neared the church, she could make out Mitchell's silhouette waiting for her. "I was beginning to think you'd changed your mind," he said as she approached. "I considered it," she admitted. "This isn't exactly the safest situation to get involved in. You can still walk away, I wouldn't blame you." Ruby shook her head. "No, I'm committed now. Besides, I've never much cared for Blackwell or Wilson. Always struck me as men who took more than they gave." Mitchell smiled slightly. Perceptive indeed. Ruby glanced around to ensure they were alone. Jacob Davidson used to come to the saloon occasionally, just for a drink, nothing more. He kept to himself mostly, but one night he'd had a few too many. Started talking about justice delayed but not denied. Said he'd found something that would bring down the mighty. Did he say what it was? No, but he mentioned where he'd hidden it. Said he'd put it in the heart of the lion's den, right under their noses. At the time, I thought it was just drunk talk, but after what you've told me. Mitchell's eyes lit up with understanding. The bank, Blackwell's bank, Ruby nodded. Jacob had a safety deposit box there. I remember him mentioning it once, said it was ironic that he was trusting his secrets to the man he was trying to expose. But how would we get to it? Blackwell's not going to just hand over the contents. No, but I might know someone who can help. The night clerk at the bank, Henry Jenkins, has been sweet on me for months. He sometimes stays late to balance the books, if I could distract him. Mitchell shook his head firmly. Too dangerous. If Blackwell suspects you're involved, he won't hesitate to hurt you. He won't suspect me, Ruby insisted. As far as anyone knows, I'm just a saloon girl with an admirer at the bank. Besides, Henry's a good man, just lonely. Mitchell studied her for a long moment. Why are you doing this, Ruby? You barely know me. She looked away, not entirely sure of the answer herself. Maybe I'm tired of watching men like Blackwell and Wilson control this town. Maybe I want to see justice done too. She paused. Or maybe I'm just reckless enough to help a stranger with sad eyes and a good cause. He smiled at that, a real smile that transformed his face. Well, whatever your reasons, I'm grateful. They formulated a plan. Ruby would visit Henry at the bank the following evening, claiming she needed advice about saving her meager earnings. While she kept him distracted at the front desk, Mitchell would slip in through the back and search for Davidson's safety deposit box. It's risky, Mitchell warned as they finalized the details. Life's risky, Ruby replied, especially out here. As they prepared to part ways, Mitchell caught her hand. Thank you, Ruby. Not many would stick their necks out like this. Don't thank me yet, she said. Save that for when we find those documents. The next day crawled by with agonizing slowness. Ruby went about her usual duties at the saloon, all while watching the clock and wondering if she was making a terrible mistake. What did she really know about Mitchell Reed? Just his side of a story that happened 5 years ago. And yet, something in her gut told her he was telling the truth. As evening approached, Ruby changed into her best dress, a modest blue affair she rarely wore. She pinned up her auburn hair and even added a touch of rouge to her cheeks. If she was going to distract Henry Jenkins, she might as well do it properly. She slipped out of the saloon just after sundown, telling the owner she had personal business to attend to. The bank was located at the far end of the main street, a solid brick building that stood out among the wooden structures surrounding it. As she approached, she could see a light on in the back office. Henry was there, just as she'd hoped. Ruby took a deep breath and knocked on the front door. After a moment, Henry appeared, his spectacles perched on his nose, looking surprised. Miss Montgomery, is everything all right? Ruby summoned her most charming smile. I hope I'm not disturbing you, Mr. Jenkins. I know it's after hours, but I was hoping for some financial advice. I've been saving a little, and I thought perhaps you could help me understand my options. Henry's face lit up. Of course, of course. Please come in. He unlocked the door and ushered her inside. I'm always happy to help a lady with her financial future." As he led her to his desk at the front of the bank, Ruby glanced toward the back door, hoping Mitchell was in position. Henry pulled out a chair for her, then settled behind his desk, looking pleased at this unexpected visit. "Now, what exactly were you hoping to learn about?" he asked eagerly. Ruby leaned forward, making sure to hold his gaze. "Well, I've managed to save about $50 over the past year, and I was wondering if the bank might be a safer place for it than under my mattress." Henry launched into an enthusiastic explanation of savings accounts, interest rates, and the security of the bank. Ruby made sure to ask questions that required detailed answers, all while listening intently for any sound that might indicate Mitchell's presence. About 15 minutes into their conversation, she heard a faint click from the back of the bank. Henry paused, frowning slightly. "Did you hear something?" he asked. Ruby reached across the desk and placed her hand on his arm. "Mr. Jenkins, Henry, there's something else I wanted to discuss with you, something more personal." His eyes widened behind his spectacles, and he immediately forgot about the noise. "Oh. What might that be, Miss Montgomery?" "Ruby, please," she said, giving his arm a gentle squeeze. "I've noticed how kind you've always been to me, Henry. Not many men in this town treat a saloon girl with such respect." Henry blushed to the roots of his thinning hair. "Well, that is. You deserve respect, Miss Ruby." Ruby smiled, feeling a twinge of guilt for manipulating the poor man's feelings, but she reminded herself what was at stake. "That means a lot to me. I've often thought that perhaps if circumstances were different." She let the sentence hang in the air, and Henry nearly fell out of his chair, leaning forward. Yes, if circumstances were different. Ruby was saved from having to elaborate by a loud crash from the back of the bank. Henry jumped to his feet. What was that? He exclaimed, moving toward the sound. Ruby's mind raced. She needed to keep him away from the back rooms where Mitchell was searching. In desperation, she did the only thing she could think of. She swayed in her chair and slumped forward, as if fainting. Oh my goodness." Henry cried, rushing back to her side. "Ruby, are you all right?" Ruby fluttered her eyelashes weakly. "I'm sorry, I just felt so faint all of a sudden. It must be the heat." Henry helped her sit up, his face creased with concern. "Let me get you some water." He hurried to a pitcher on a side table. While his back was turned, Ruby glanced toward the back of the bank and saw Mitchell slip out the rear door, something clutched in his hand. Relief washed over her. "Here, drink this," Henry said, returning with a glass of water. Ruby took a few sips, then smiled gratefully. "Thank you, Henry. I'm feeling better already, but perhaps I should go home and rest." Of course. Shall I walk you home?" "No," Ruby said too quickly. She moderated her tone. "That's very gallant of you, but I'll be fine. The fresh air will do me good." Henry looked disappointed but didn't argue. "Well, if you're sure, but please come back tomorrow if you'd like to continue our discussion about your savings or other matters." Ruby stood, steadying herself on the desk for show. "I'd like that, Henry. Thank you for your time tonight." As soon as she was outside, Ruby hurried away from the bank, heading not toward the saloon but to the arranged meeting spot behind the church. Mitchell was already there, pacing anxiously. "Did you find it?" she asked breathlessly. Mitchell held up a thick envelope. "Right where you said it would be, safety deposit box number 17. His expression was serious. "But we have a problem. I had to break the lock to get it open. Jenkins is going to know someone was in there." Ruby's heart sank. "How long do you think we have before he discovers it?" "Not long. He'll check the back rooms before he leaves. We need to get somewhere safe and look through these papers now." "My place," Ruby decided. "It's just a small room above the saloon, but no one will look for you there." They moved quickly through the darkening town, staying off the main streets. Ruby led Mitchell to a narrow staircase at the back of the saloon that led to her modest quarters, a single room with a bed, a small table, and a chest for her belongings. Mitchell hesitated at the door. "I don't want to compromise your reputation." Ruby almost laughed. "I work in a saloon, Mitchell. My reputation isn't exactly pristine to begin with." Once inside, Mitchell emptied the envelope onto the table. It contained several documents, land deeds, letters, and what appeared to be a ledger of some kind. "This is it," Mitchell said, his voice taut with excitement as he examined the papers. Bank records showing payments to Sheriff Wilson and Judge Reynolds. Letters between Blackwell and the railroad companies discussing the Davidson land before Thomas's death. And this, he held up a handwritten confession, is from Pete Wilson, the sheriff's brother-in-law, written before he died in that shootout. He admits to being hired to drive the Davidsons off their land, including the order to shoot at the house if necessary. Ruby read over his shoulder, her blood running cold. They were willing to kill an entire family for land. Land that would be worth a fortune once the railroad came through, Mitchell confirmed grimly. And they nearly got away with it. So what now? Ruby asked. Take this to the territorial marshal, Mitchell nodded. The nearest marshal's office is in Tucson, about 3 days' ride. But first, I need to get you somewhere safe. When Blackwell and Wilson realize these documents are missing, they'll tear the town apart looking for them. I'm coming with you, Ruby said firmly. Mitchell looked startled. What? No, it's too dangerous. I'm already in danger, she pointed out. They'll figure out I helped you. Besides, you'll need a witness to corroborate your story. Before Mitchell could argue further, there was a pounding on the door downstairs, followed by shouting. That'll be the sheriff, Mitchell said grimly. Jenkins must have discovered the break-in. Ruby moved to the window and peered out. There are men surrounding the saloon, at least 6 of them. Mitchell quickly gathered the documents and tucked them back into the envelope. Is there another way out of here? Ruby pointed to the window. There's a shed roof below. We can drop down to it, then to the alley behind. They heard heavy footsteps on the stairs outside. Mitchell drew his revolver. Go, I'll be right behind you. Ruby opened the window and climbed out onto the sloped roof of the storage shed. The drop to the ground wasn't far, but in the darkness, it was treacherous. She lowered herself carefully, then jumped the remaining distance. Mitchell followed just as the door to her room burst open. A shot rang out, splintering the window frame. Mitchell returned fire and then dropped down beside Ruby. Run, he commanded, and they sprinted down the alley as more shots echoed behind them. They ran through the darkened streets, ducking between buildings and avoiding the main roads. Behind them, they could hear shouts and whistles as the sheriff organized a search. We need horses, Mitchell panted as they paused to catch their breath. The livery stable is on the other side of town, Ruby replied. We'll never make it there without being seen. Mitchell thought for a moment. The Davidson place. It's just outside town, and he kept a couple of horses, if they're still there. It was their only chance. They made their way carefully to the edge of town, staying in the shadows. The Davidson property was a small homestead about a mile beyond the town limits. As they approached, they could see it was dark and apparently abandoned. To their relief, there were indeed 2 horses in the small corral behind the house, a sturdy bay gelding and a dappled mare. Jacob always did take good care of his animals, Mitchell murmured as he saddled the horses. Even when he had nothing else, he made sure they were fed. Ruby had little experience with horses beyond the occasional leisurely ride, but she managed to mount the mare while Mitchell checked the gelding's tack. Once we start riding, they'll hear us, Mitchell warned. We'll need to ride hard and fast. Stay close to me. Ruby nodded, her heart pounding with fear and, strangely, exhilaration. In the 3 years she'd lived in Redemption Springs, she'd never imagined herself fleeing in the night like an outlaw. Yet here she was, about to gallop off into the darkness with a man she barely knew, pursued by the law. They set off at a gallop, heading south toward Tucson. Behind them, they could hear shouts as their escape was discovered. Mitchell led them off the main trail and into the desert, navigating by the stars and his own knowledge of the territory. They rode for hours, pushing the horses as hard as they dared in the darkness. Finally, as dawn began to lighten the eastern sky, Mitchell signaled for them to stop near a small creek sheltered by cottonwood trees. We need to rest the horses, he said, dismounting, and ourselves. Ruby slid from her saddle, her legs trembling with fatigue. She'd never ridden so far or so hard in her life. Every muscle ached and she was covered in dust. Mitchell helped her sit on a fallen log, then went to tend to the horses. When he returned, he carried a canteen and some jerky from his saddlebags. "It's not much," he apologized, offering her the food and water. Ruby accepted gratefully. "It's more than I expected when I agreed to help you." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes, eating and drinking. "Why did you come with me?" Mitchell asked finally. "You had a life in Redemption Springs. Now you're a fugitive." Ruby considered the question. "What kind of life was it, really? Serving drinks to men who saw me as nothing more than convenience, living in a town controlled by corrupt men." She looked up at him. "When you showed up, it was like seeing a crack in a dam, a chance for something to change." Mitchell studied her face. "You're a remarkable woman, Ruby Montgomery." "I'm just someone who recognized an opportunity to do the right thing," she said. "Besides, I've always wondered what lay beyond Redemption Springs. I guess now I'll find out." As the sun rose higher, they continued their journey, keeping to less traveled paths where possible. Mitchell was constantly vigilant, checking their back trail for signs of pursuit. By midday, they reached a small settlement where they were able to purchase supplies without attracting too much attention. "We should make Tucson by tomorrow evening," Mitchell said as they rode on. "The territorial marshal there, James Harker, is an honest man. I've worked with him before." "And you think he'll believe us over Sheriff Wilson?" Ruby asked. "With the evidence we have." Mitchell patted the saddlebag where he'd secured the documents. "Yes, plus Harker has no love for corruption. He's been trying to clean up this territory for years." They camped that night in a sheltered arroyo, building only a small fire that wouldn't be visible from a distance. As they sat by the flickering flames, Ruby found herself studying Mitchell's face, the lines around his eyes, the small scar along his jaw, the way his expression softened when he wasn't on guard. "How did you become a gunfighter?" she asked suddenly. Mitchell looked up, surprised by the question. "I never set out to be one," he said after a moment. "After my parents died, I worked as a ranch hand, then as a guard for stagecoach companies. I found I was good with a gun, and in this territory, that's a skill that pays well." He shrugged. "One job led to another, and somewhere along the way I got a reputation. Do you ever regret it, the life you've led?" He poked at the fire with a stick. "Sometimes it's a lonely path, but I've tried to use whatever skills I have to protect those who need it." He glanced at her. "What about you? How did a woman like you end up working in a saloon in a place like Redemption Springs?" Ruby smiled wryly. "The usual way, bad luck and few choices." She hugged her knees to her chest. "My father was a prospector who never found his big strike. My mother died when I was 16. When father followed 3 years later, I had no family and no prospects. The saloon was hiring and it paid better than working as a maid or laundress." "You deserve better," Mitchell said quietly. "So do most people," Ruby replied, "but we make do with what life gives us." They fell silent, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, Mitchell said, "Get some rest, I'll take first watch." The next day brought clear skies and no sign of pursuit. They made good time, reaching the outskirts of Tucson as the sun began to set. The town was larger than Redemption Springs, bustling with activity even as darkness fell. Mitchell led them directly to the marshal's office, a solid adobe building on the main street. He dismounted and helped Ruby down from her horse. "Wait here," he said. "Let me make sure Harker is in." Ruby nodded, suddenly nervous. What if the marshal didn't believe them? What if he was corrupt too, or had connections to Blackwell? She watched anxiously as Mitchell entered the building. He returned a few minutes later with a tall, lean man with iron-gray hair and a weathered face. The man's sharp eyes assessed Ruby quickly. "Miss Montgomery, I'm Marshal James Harker," he said, tipping his hat. "Mitchell tells me you've had quite an adventure." "That's one way to put it, Marshal," Ruby replied. Harker gestured for them to come inside. "Let's talk privately." "Sounds like you have quite a story to tell." Inside, Mitchell spread the documents on Harker's desk. The marshal examined them carefully, his expression growing grimmer with each page he read. "This is damning evidence," he said finally. "Blackmail, corruption, conspiracy to commit murder. These men belong behind bars." "Will you help us, Jim?" Mitchell asked. Harker nodded firmly. "You can count on it. I'll send telegrams to the territorial governor and the federal authorities tonight. By morning, I'll have a posse ready to ride to Redemption Springs." Ruby felt a surge of relief so strong it made her light-headed. They had done it. The truth would come out and justice would be served. Harker arranged for them to stay at a nearby hotel, posting deputies outside their rooms for protection. "Just in case Wilson or Blackwell have friends in Tucson," he explained. The next morning, Harker assembled a posse of 10 deputies and reliable citizens. Mitchell insisted on riding with them, despite Harker's concerns. "I need to see this through," he said firmly. Ruby stood in the marshal's office watching as the men prepared to leave. Mitchell approached her, his expression serious. "You should stay here," he said. "Where it's safe." "I've come this far," she replied. "I want to see it finished." Mitchell studied her face, then nodded reluctantly. "Stay close to me if anything happens." "Nothing will happen," Ruby said with more confidence than she felt. "We have the law on our side now." The ride back to Redemption Springs took most of the day. They approached the town cautiously as the sun began to set, uncertain of what reception awaited them. To their surprise, the town seemed unnaturally quiet. Few people were on the streets, and those who were hurried along with their heads down, avoiding eye contact with the approaching posse. "Something's not right," Mitchell muttered as they rode down the main street. They reached the sheriff's office, which appeared deserted. Harker dismounted and tried the door. It was unlocked. Inside, they found the cells empty and no sign of Sheriff Wilson. "Spread out," Harker ordered his deputies. "Find Wilson and Blackwell." It didn't take long. One of the deputies returned from the bank with news that Blackwell's office was cleared out, his safe empty. Another reported that Wilson's house appeared abandoned, clothes and personal items missing. "They've run," Harker said grimly. "Probably as soon as they realized you'd taken the evidence." Mitchell's face hardened. "They won't get far, not with every lawman in the territory looking for them." Harker began organizing the search, sending telegrams to neighboring towns and dispatching deputies to check likely escape routes. Mitchell, however, seemed lost in thought. "What is it?" Ruby asked him quietly. "It doesn't make sense," he said. "Blackwell has too much at stake here, the bank, his investments, and Wilson's not the type to run. They're up to something." As if in answer to his suspicions, a young boy came running into the sheriff's office, breathless with excitement. "Marshal, there's a fire out at the old Davidson place." Mitchell was on his feet instantly. "The documents, the originals, might still be there, or it could be a trap," Ruby warned. "Either way, we need to check it out," Mitchell replied. He turned to Harker. "Jim, can you spare a few men?" The marshal nodded. "Johnson, Peters, Riley go with Reed. The rest of you continue the search in town." Mitchell turned to Ruby. "Stay here, please." She shook her head stubbornly. "I'm coming with you." Mitchell looked like he wanted to argue but seemed to recognize the futility. "Stay behind me, then." They rode hard for the Davidson place, the glow of flames visible from a distance. As they approached, they could see the small house was fully engulfed, the fire lighting up the night sky. There, Mitchell pointed to 2 figures on horseback watching the blaze from a nearby rise. Even at a distance, Ruby recognized Sheriff Wilson's broad shoulders and Blackwell's distinctive silhouette. The deputies spread out, attempting to circle behind the 2 men. Mitchell urged his horse forward, drawing his revolver. "Wilson, Blackwell," he shouted. "It's over." The 2 men wheeled their horses around, startled. Wilson drew his gun and fired wildly in their direction. The deputies returned fire, and for a moment, the night was filled with the sound of gunshots. Through the chaos, Ruby saw Blackwell break away, spurring his horse toward a ravine to the east. Without thinking, she kicked her horse and gave chase, determined not to let him escape. "Ruby, no," Mitchell shouted behind her, but she was already racing after the banker. Blackwell glanced back, his face contorting with rage when he saw who pursued him. He drew a pistol from his coat and fired back at her. The bullet whizzed past her ear, and Ruby ducked low over her horse's neck. Ahead, the ravine narrowed, forcing Blackwell to slow his mount. Ruby gained ground, her smaller weight an advantage on the treacherous terrain. As Blackwell's horse picked its way carefully down a steep section, Ruby closed the distance. Suddenly, Blackwell's horse stumbled, sending the banker tumbling from the saddle. He landed hard but scrambled to his feet, gun still in hand. Ruby reined in her horse, realizing too late the danger she was in. Blackwell aimed his pistol directly at her. "You stupid girl," he snarled. "You should have stayed out of this." Ruby froze, staring down the barrel of the gun, certain her last moment had come. Then a shot rang out and Blackwell jerked backward, his weapon discharging harmlessly into the ground. He collapsed, clutching his shoulder. Mitchell appeared beside Ruby, his revolver still smoking. "Are you all right?" he asked urgently. She nodded, too shaken to speak. Mitchell dismounted and approached Blackwell, kicking the banker's gun away. "It's over, Blackwell. Your scheme, your power in Redemption Springs, all of it." Blackwell glared up at him, his face pale with pain and fury. "You've won nothing, Reed. That land is still developed, the money still made. All you've done is ruin a good town." "A town built on corruption and the blood of an innocent boy," Mitchell replied coldly. "No, the town will be better off without men like you." The deputies arrived, taking Blackwell into custody. One of them reported that Wilson had been wounded in the firefight and captured as well. The fire at the Davidson place had been contained before it could spread to the surrounding grassland. As they rode back to town, Ruby found herself watching Mitchell's profile against the night sky. He seemed different now, less haunted, perhaps, as if a weight had been lifted from his shoulders. Back in Redemption Springs, Marshal Harker established a temporary headquarters in the sheriff's office. Over the next few days, more evidence of corruption came to light as townspeople, freed from fear of Wilson and Blackwell, came forward with their own stories. The territorial governor arrived to personally oversee the investigation, bringing with him journalists who ensured the full story would be told throughout the territory. Judge Reynolds resigned in disgrace when his involvement was revealed. Through it all, Mitchell remained in town, giving statements and helping to sort through the tangle of corruption. Ruby, too, found herself suddenly respected as a key witness rather than just the saloon girl. A week after their dramatic return to Redemption Springs, Ruby found Mitchell sitting alone on the steps of the church, watching the sunset. "Mind if I join you?" she asked. He smiled and moved over. "I was hoping you would." They sat in companionable silence for a few minutes. "What happens now?" Ruby finally asked. "For you, I mean." Mitchell took a deep breath. "The governor offered me a job, deputy territorial marshal, said they need honest men with experience. Are you going to take it?" "I'm considering it." He turned to look at her. "What about you? Will you stay in Redemption Springs?" Ruby considered the question. The town was changing already. With Blackwell and Wilson gone, new leadership was emerging. The saloon owner had offered her a better position as manager rather than just a server. "I don't know," she admitted. "For the first time, I feel like I have choices. It's overwhelming." Mitchell nodded in understanding. "Choices can be the hardest part of freedom." "Is that what we have now, freedom?" "I think so," he said quietly. "At least from the past. What we do with it is up to us." Ruby studied his profile. In the weeks since they'd first met, something had changed between them, a bond forged through danger and shared purpose. She'd seen him at his most determined and his most vulnerable. She'd watched him face his demons and emerge victorious. "Mitchell," she said softly, "if you take that marshal's position, would there be room in your new life for someone else?" He turned to her, surprise and hope mingling in his eyes. "Are you offering to come with me?" "I'm suggesting that perhaps we could find out what kind of future two people with fresh starts might build together." Mitchell took her hand, his touch gentle. "I'd like that, Ruby, very much." The next day, they received word that Rebecca Davidson had arrived in town, summoned by Marshal Harker to hear the truth about her father and brother. She was a quiet, dignified woman of about 30, with the same steady gaze her father had possessed. Mitchell met with her privately, telling her everything: the original conspiracy, her brother's death, her father's discovery of the truth, and his murder. He showed her the documents that proved it all. When he finished, Rebecca sat in silence for a long moment. Then she looked up at Mitchell. "All these years I believed you were responsible for Thomas's death. My father never did, but I needed someone to blame." "I understand," Mitchell said softly. "I blamed myself too." Rebecca reached across the table and took his hand. "Thank you for clearing my father's name. And Thomas's memory. It means more than you know." Later that day, Mitchell found Ruby at the saloon where she was teaching her replacement the business. "How did it go with Rebecca?" she asked. "Better than I expected," he replied. "She's strong like her father. She's decided to stay in Redemption Springs, reclaim what's left of her family's legacy." "That's good," Ruby said. "This town could use more people like the Davidsons." Mitchell hesitated, then said, "I've decided to accept the marshal's position. I'll be based in Tucson, but I'll be traveling throughout the territory." Ruby felt a mix of emotions: happiness for him, uncertainty for herself. "When do you leave?" "2 days from now." He took a deep breath. "Ruby, I know it's sudden, but will you come with me to Tucson?" She asked, surprised by the directness of the question. "To Tucson, to wherever the job takes me." He stepped closer. "I know we haven't known each other long, but I've never met anyone like you. Your courage, your heart. I don't want to ride away from Redemption Springs without you." Ruby's heart raced. It was sudden, perhaps even reckless, but then the most important choices often were. "Yes," she said simply. "I'll come with you." His face broke into a smile that transformed his features, erasing the habitual wariness and replacing it with joy. "You mean it?" "I do," Ruby said, surprising herself with the certainty she felt. "But Mitchell, I should be clear, I'm not looking to be just a companion on the trail. If I'm going to start a new life, I want it to be one with purpose." "What did you have in mind?" Ruby smiled. "I've been thinking about that. I've spent years observing people, learning their stories, their troubles. I think I could be useful in your work, not as a deputy, perhaps, but as someone who notices things, who can talk to people in ways lawmen can't." Mitchell considered this, nodding slowly. "A partner, then, in all ways." "In all ways," Ruby agreed. 2 days later, they stood on the edge of town, horses packed, ready to ride toward Tucson and their new life. Marshal Harker had gone ahead, leaving the cleanup in Redemption Springs to his deputies. As they prepared to mount up, Rebecca Davidson approached them, a small wooden box in her hands. "I wanted to say goodbye," she said, "and to give you this." She handed the box to Mitchell. "It was my father's. He would want you to have it." Mitchell opened the box to find a silver pocket watch, simple but elegant. "It was his father's, and his father's before that," Rebecca explained. "He always said it should go to a man of honor. I can't think of anyone more deserving." Mitchell was visibly moved. "Thank you, Rebecca. I'll treasure it." After Rebecca left, Mitchell turned to Ruby. "Ready?" she nodded, excitement and nervousness mingling in her stomach. "Ready." They rode out together, leaving Redemption Springs behind. As they crested the first hill and looked back at the town, now peaceful in the morning light, Ruby felt a sense of closure. "No regrets?" Mitchell asked, noticing her backward glance. "None," she assured him. "Only looking forward now." 3 months later, Ruby stood on the porch of a small house on the outskirts of Tucson, watching the sunset paint the desert in gold and crimson. The house was modest but comfortable, their first real home together. Inside, Mitchell was preparing dinner, a domestic skill that had surprised and delighted her. The past months had been a whirlwind of activity. Mitchell had thrown himself into his new role as deputy marshal with dedication, while Ruby had found her own place, often using her insight and people skills to help in difficult cases. Together, they had begun to build a reputation as a formidable team. Their relationship, too, had deepened. Living and working together, sharing dangers and triumphs, they had grown closer than Ruby had thought possible. Mitchell's initial reserve had given way to a warmth and tenderness that sometimes took her breath away. She heard his footsteps behind her and smiled as his arms encircled her waist. "Penny for your thoughts," he murmured, resting his chin on her shoulder. "Just thinking about how much has changed," she replied, leaning back against him. 3 months ago, I was serving whiskey in a saloon, believing that was all life had in store for me." Mitchell turned her to face him. "Any regrets?" "Not a single one," she said honestly. He studied her face for a moment, then reached into his pocket. "I've been carrying this around for weeks, waiting for the right moment." He held out a small ring, a simple gold band with a modest diamond. "I realized today that there is no perfect moment, only the ones we make for ourselves." Ruby's heart skipped a beat as he took her hand. "Ruby Montgomery, you've brought light into my life when I thought I'd live forever in shadow. Will you marry me?" The words she had longed to hear, spoken by the man who had come to mean everything to her. Ruby felt tears well in her eyes as joy flooded through her. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, Mitchell, I will marry you." As she spoke those words, Mitchell fell to his knees before her, overcome with emotion. In that moment, it seemed to Ruby that every hardship he had endured, every scar he had earned, both visible and invisible, transformed into light that radiated from within him, illuminating his face with a joy so pure it took her breath away. He slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to his feet and pulled her into an embrace that felt like coming home after a long journey. "I love you, Ruby," he murmured against her hair, "more than I ever thought possible." "And I love you, Mitchell Reed," she replied, holding him tightly. Today and always. As the sun set on the desert, casting long shadows across their little homestead, Ruby knew that their story was just beginning. There would be challenges ahead. Certainly life as a marshal's wife would never be easy or without danger. But they would face those challenges together, with the strength and courage that had brought them through darkness into light. In the wild territory where they had found each other, where justice and truth had prevailed against corruption and greed, they had discovered something rare and precious. A love forged in adversity, tempered by shared purpose, and destined to grow stronger with each passing day. And as Mitchell held her in his arms under the vast Arizona sky, his face alight with love and hope, Ruby knew with absolute certainty that she had found her true home at last, not in a place, but in a person. In the heart of a man who had once been haunted by his past, but now looked toward their future with eyes full of light. They were married the following spring, in a small ceremony attended by close friends, including Marshall Harker and Rebecca Davidson. Ruby wore a simple white dress, and Mitchell wore his marshal's badge proudly on his best suit. They exchanged vows under an arch of desert wildflowers, promising to stand by each other through whatever challenges lay ahead, and challenges there were. Mitchell's work as a deputy marshal took him to the farthest reaches of the territory, confronting outlaws and settling disputes in mining camps and cattle towns. Ruby often accompanied him, using her quick wit and perceptive nature to gather information and gain the trust of those who might be wary of a lawman. Together, they earned a reputation for fairness and integrity. Mitchell's past as a gunfighter occasionally cast shadows, but more often opened doors, as his reputation for standing up for the innocent preceded him. Ruby, with her warmth and genuine interest in people's lives, became a beloved figure in the communities they visited. Over the years, their home in Tucson became a haven, not just for themselves but for others seeking justice or a fresh start. Young deputies would stop by for advice, widows and orphans found temporary shelter, and more than one reformed outlaw credited the Reeds with giving them a second chance at an honest life. Their family grew with the birth of their daughter, Sarah, named after Ruby's mother, and later, a son they called Jacob, in honor of the man whose courage had brought them together. Mitchell proved to be a devoted father, teaching his children to ride and shoot, but also to think for themselves and stand up for what was right. As the territory moved toward statehood, Mitchell was offered the position of territorial marshal, a recognition of his years of dedicated service. Though the role would mean less time in the field and more administrative duties, he accepted, knowing it was time to be more present for his family. Ruby, never one to be idle, opened a small school for the children of Tucson, particularly those who might otherwise go without education, the children of miners, ranch hands, and immigrants. Her school became known for accepting students regardless of background or ability to pay, reflecting the inclusive spirit that had always defined her. On their 20th anniversary, Mitchell surprised Ruby by taking her back to Redemption Springs. The town had changed dramatically, now a respectable stop on the railroad line, with a proper school, a church, and businesses that operated within the law. Rebecca Davidson had indeed reclaimed her family's legacy, becoming a community leader and eventual mayor of the town. As they stood on the hill overlooking Redemption Springs, the same spot where they had looked back 20 years earlier, Mitchell took Ruby's hand. "Did you ever imagine, that day we rode away, that this is where life would lead us?" he asked. Ruby smiled, the years having added character to her face but not dimmed the sparkle in her eyes. "Not in my wildest dreams, but I wouldn't change a single step of the journey." Mitchell pulled her close, his arms as strong as ever despite the silver now threading through his hair. "Nor would I. Every trail we've ridden, every challenge we've faced, they all led us here together." "Together," Ruby echoed, resting her head against his chest. "The best destination I could have hoped for." As they rode back to Tucson, to their home and their children, Ruby reflected on the strange twists of fate that had brought them to this point. A saloon girl and a gunfighter, both carrying wounds from their past, had found in each other not just love but redemption. The scars they both bore, his more visible than hers, perhaps, but no less real, had indeed turned to light, illuminating a path forward neither could have envisioned alone. And in that light, they had built not just a life but a legacy of justice, of compassion, of standing firm for what was right even when the cost was high. It was a legacy their children would carry forward, ensuring that the light Mitchell and Ruby had kindled would continue to shine in a world that always needed more of it. As the sun set behind them, painting the desert in gold once more, Ruby reached for her husband's hand. In the familiar touch, she felt all they had shared and all that was yet to come. And she knew, with the certainty that comes from a love tested by time and trial, that whatever the future held, they would face it as they had faced everything else together, with courage, with faith in each other, and with hearts open to the light.